Yo, what's up everybody? Danny Segura here, and today I'll be doing my very first reaction video to news. So this is very exciting. So here I'm sporting the good old Galatasaray jersey. I gotta get a new one, by the way, with Falcao on it. Wearing it in celebration of Falcao El Tigre joining this team I love and very much respect. But anyways, neither here or there. So I'm here to talk about Cris Cyborg signing with Bellator, leaving her status as a free agent and now being under the Bellator banner with Scott Coker. So that news came out around yesterday, September 3rd, around 4 p.m. Scott Coker basically put out a tweet saying, teasing the news that there was a big signing coming up. A lot of people thought it was a rugby player, but many thought it was possibly Cris Cyborg. I think this was an obvious one, although a lot to talk about here. This is very big news. Still news that we expected. I don't think it caught a lot of people by surprise. Maybe Cyborg could have gone to one. We know that they're getting invested into the U.S. market a lot more, right? Signings like Demetrius Johnson, Sage Northcutt, Eddie Alvarez, etc., the deal with TNT. But nonetheless, I think we knew that Cyborg was very fond of Bellator, having talked about Bellator often, having praised, their women's featherweight division, their champion, Scott Coker, right? They're just the promotion in general. Obviously, Scott Coker, former Strikeforce president, Cris Cyborg, former Strikeforce champion. So we knew they've worked together. So this was a bit of an obvious signing, but a lot to unpack here. So let's get right into it. So a few things I want to discuss. I want to discuss the pros and cons of this signing. I do think there's a lot of pros to it, but I think there are some cons to it as well, which I will get into in the later part of this video. And then kind of just put into words what this UFC chapter was, like what this UFC chapter was in Cris Cyborg's career, what it was for the UFC. It was a very little interesting case study there. Very bizarre career in the UFC, but I'll get into that as well at the end of this video. So anyways, before I share my thoughts and we go into what I think of this signing, I just first want to read very quickly the statement that Scott Coker put out there, to the media that you can find over at MMAfighting.com. Just basically talking about the signing. So first, he announced the news via Twitter. And he posted a video of Cyborg basically talking about, addressing the fans and talking about her joining Bellator. And the caption for Twitter wrote, this is via Scott Coker. I am proud to announce that Bellator MMA has signed Cris Cyborg to the biggest contract in women's MMA history. Welcome to the family. Then he goes on to say on the statement that he provided to the media, saying, I have worked with countless athletes over my 30 plus years of promoting combat sports, but there's no one quite like Cyborg. Her ability to excite the crowd from the moment she makes her walk to the cage is special, and having had the pleasure of promoting several of her fights in the past, I am looking forward to the opportunity of promoting her once again. Cris Cyborg is the most dominant female fighter in the history of the sport, and she will be a perfect fit here at Bellator, where champion Julia Budd and the other women that make up the best female featherweight division in the world have eagerly awaited her arrival. I just wanted to throw that in there because I do think Scott Coker is very, very on point with this statement. And, he's caught some heat recently for, saying Ryan Bader is the best heavyweight today. I think most people that follow MMA closely would probably feel that's not true. I mean, we would only know until he actually fights the baddest man on the planet, who is Stipe at this very moment. And then we'll see how that goes. But I think if you know a thing or two about MMA, you probably feel like Stipe would win that, right? So yeah, anyways, that statement was a little off, but often promoters, they do that. They have to promote, right? But within the promotion, it somewhat has to be backed up by reality and facts, right? So some statements will seem outrageous, some are debatable, some are very on point. And in this case, Scott Coker was very, very on point here. So I don't know about the biggest contract in women's MMA history. A lot has been made about that. Headlines like, yo, Cris Cyborg just signed the biggest contract in women's MMA history. This, and that. We need numbers to back that up. So I am hesitant to call that. And also, I don't have the numbers, but I would assume that giving, Ronda Rousey's status, her pool, what she represents in MMA, I mean, she's really one of the most recognizable figures in MMA today, even with her not fighting, her not being active. And in women's MMA history, she's definitely the face. She's the biggest figure we've seen. Cris Cyborg's up there as well. Don't get me wrong. Cris Cyborg has done a lot. She's a pioneer. She's a very important figure, a fighter for the history books. But yeah, I think probably Ronda Rousey had that contract on lock. But nonetheless, Bellator getting a really, really important acquisition here with Cris Cyborg. So I assume they would open up their checkbooks and write something quite generous for Cyborg. So anyways, then Scott Coker goes on to say Cris Cyborg is the most dominant female fighter in the history of the sport. That is very, very true, I find. I mean, you can make a case right for Amanda Nunez and Ronda Rousey. Yes, they were extremely dominant. I mean, Nunez is still very dominant. The way she's putting out people is just incredible. It's amazing what she's doing. Champ, the whole thing, right? Ronda Rousey just throwing girls on their head and breaking their arms within seconds. It was just her run at the time before she lost. That run was very like Anderson Silva-esque in the sense that it had its own magic. Like you were just wondering the whole time, like, who can stop this girl? Every time you think it couldn't get better, she would top it with less seconds, with a more brutal finish, etc. Tougher opponents. But I think that doesn't compare to Cyborg's run. I mean, Cyborg had a 13-year run of being undefeated. That is unheard of in MMA. Very, very few fighters get to pull that off. And honestly, a lot of that is composed in the regional circuit. So Cyborg's run was, had some fights in the regional circuit, probably not at the very, very top. But nonetheless, a lot of that was done fighting the best girls at the time. I mean, she's been champion for a really long time. We talk about Strikeforce, we talk about Invicta, right? So, yeah, I think Cris Cyborg is easily the most dominant female fighter in the history of the sport. So, yeah, very on point there by Scott Coker. And then, he kind of goes on to talk about, Bellator kind of having the best female featherweight division in the world. Invicta, obviously, very, very legit organization. But nonetheless, it's been drained a lot by the UFC. The UFC doesn't really have a division. They have some good fighters, Megan Anderson, Felicia Spencer, right? Fighters that have won belts elsewhere, mostly Invicta. And bantamweights that are very, very good and that have gone up to 145. And you could say that they're, some of the best 45ers as well. But nonetheless, there was never really a division going on. So Coker, again, completely on point by just saying they have the best featherweight division. They actually have a division. So I would assume they just take that by default, right? So yeah, I just wanted to quickly get that statement in there so you guys know what's up, and then you guys can also check that out over at MMAfighting.com. So now let's get into the pros and cons. Let me sip here my coffee. Bet you guys haven't seen this in a minute. This was actually a printing error. It's supposed to be here, so I got to get this cup for free because there was a printing malfunction. The MMA Beat shouts out. But anyways, so a lot to unpack here. There are a lot of positives to Cris Cyborg joining Bellator. Number one, she's actually going to be joining a division. I think there was a very weird feeling, and I'm kind of touching about her legacy in the UFC, which I want to do towards the end, but I think I have to express this point. But there's a very weird feeling with a lot of her fights being, we didn't know who was next. We didn't know if the UFC was going to yank a champion from Invicta and just put her in there. We didn't know if the UFC was going to offer, more money, championship money to a big name at 135 and have them go up. It was really uncertain. There was no development of contenders, of prospects. Like, you couldn't pinpoint a fighter and be like, okay, this fighter could be on the path to a title shot against Cris Cyborg, right? There was really none of that. I mean, they brought her over to kick off the division, and she didn't even get the chance to become the first champion, right? Remember, it was between Holly Holm and Jermaine Durandamy. So a lot of just weird stuff happening. But number one, I'm really happy she's actually going to be participating in a division. Whenever a big talent joins a division, it usually brings up the talent around them as well. So also exposure, etc. So this is just healthy for the sport, that there's actually a development of 145-pound fighters, not bantamweights forced to move up or champions getting yanked. None of that. There's actually contenders, veterans, prospects, right? All that is a whole ecosystem that is very important, and Cyborg is now part of. So that is very, very, very cool. Another pro that I see is just Cyborg is happy, man. Cyborg is, as I said, she's a fighter for the history books. She is a legendary fighter. She built women's MMA, helped build women's MMA, right? She wasn't the only one responsible for that. Ronda Rousey had a big part in that. Gina Carano, Miesha Tate, a lot of pioneers. But she's one of the very few that falls in the category of pioneer, right? Of being one of the best as well, champion, right? And also, she is in the GOAT conversation. I think at this point is between Amanda Nunez and Cris Cyborg. I favor Nunez more, but if you were to tell me that you think Cris Cyborg is the GOAT, I wouldn't have much of a problem with it. I think there are things to be said, and there's arguments to be made for sure for her case of being the GOAT. But anyways, yeah, so whenever you see somebody that has that kind of status, right, that kind of royalty in a specific space, it kind of sucks seeing them have like a sour feeling towards the sport and the promotion. And I feel like a lot of that plagued, the last few months or year of her MMA career within the UFC. There's a lot of negativity surrounding her career, whether it was, feuding with promoters or fans or, commentators, right, or et cetera, or not getting fights, complaining about things, complaining about the lack of division, no respect, no promotion. Like, it just sucks seeing a fighter of that caliber going through that, right? So, number one, that's pretty big for me. I think, she's happy. It's nice seeing, Cyborg happy. So, and it looks like she's happy. Bellator's happy. The fans are happy. So that's a pretty good part of the signing as well. And with that comes the end of the UFC Cyborg drama, which it was just exhausting. I'm not gonna lie. I work in MMA media, obviously for MMAfighting.com, and all those things did well in clicks and whatnot, right? It was things that people wanted to tune in and see what was going on and whatnot. But at one point it got really, really toxic. I mean, towards the end there, and we saw, for the most part, I feel like the public felt that it was the UFC and the promotion attacking Cyborg, but I think it was ugly from both sides, and we got a good taste of that at the very, very end when Cris Cyborg's team released a video altering Dana White's words, making him say something that he didn't actually say, right? And putting that out there, and then only, later, a few days later after that's been circulating, only backing out and being like, oh, hey, sorry, yeah, we made a mistake, we did this, and that. You can actually get sued for that. That is a very, very big deal. They teach you that in journalism school in your law and ethics class. So, yeah, it was ugly from both sides. I do think it was probably more UFC and promotion, right? Because it's the big machine, right? The promotion versus the individual Cyborg. And I think a lot of her things were on point, but nonetheless, it was from both sides, right? It takes two to tango. So if you can't fix it, move on, right? That happens with a lot of partnerships and relationships. Often it's not that either side is bad; it's just they don't work together, and I don't think that was a good fit. So yeah, I'm glad we can all move on from that. And apart from that, we'll probably see Cyborg fight more often. She was kind of active in the UFC, fighting about like twice a year, I believe. But nonetheless, here at Bellator, having an actual division, having contenders, she could probably get a lot more reps in, which is good. More fights, the better, right? The only con that I see from this deal, and I think, we already saw that because we knew that the UFC had cut ties with Cyborg. I mean, they wanted nothing with the Cyborg business. I mean, the UFC has an exclusive period in their contracts of 6 months that they can negotiate exclusively with the fighter that decides to try out free agency. And they usually honor that, right? They usually honor that, whether it's to get the fighter back or, kind of put them on ice, part of negotiations too and business, right, I guess. But with Cyborg, they just wave that off, and you don't see that often. So they were really done with the Cyborg business. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff there. And with that being said, we're losing a pretty big fight there, which is the Amanda Nunez rematch. And I think, speaking to what I was just saying earlier about the GOAT conversation, I think Ronda Rousey is out of that picture. I mean, at her peak, she was definitely there. A lot of people consider her, but I think her losses and also the way that she handled them, and the type of losses as well, kind of tainted that, and I think most fans would consider her a great, but not the GOAT. I think it's between Nunez and Cyborg. That rematch would have defined a lot of things. I think if Nunez would have won, say another knockout, I think it's pretty clear who the GOAT is, right? But that fight happened so quick. Cyborg hadn't lost in forever, right? Prime Nunez versus Cyborg, who's still very, very good, but probably not in her prime. What if Cyborg would have gone a win over Nunez, and then we got a trilogy, and then she would have come on top? You don't know that kind of stuff, right? We're just assuming. And although I think I would favor Nunez in any single bout that she would be involved in, even including against Cyborg again, it wouldn't be far-fetched to think that Cyborg could get that one back, right? Like, let's pretend none of this would have happened. Let's say the rematch would have gone down, and me looking into the future, and I would have told you, oh no, Cris Cyborg actually got a stoppage win. She put away Amanda Nunez. You might be a little bit surprised, but it doesn't sound like not real, right? It's definitely a plausible thing. So I thought that fight was very important for that discussion, for women's MMA, right? For that hierarchy as well. Of who is the greatest of all time. And I think, we're pretty much robbed from that, which I think it's okay given all the other positives. I mean, Cyborg at this point, she's 36 years old. She's not 26 or anything like that. So, she's in good shape. I see her fighting for a bit, but not long enough to stick around for, I don't know, Amanda Nunez to go free agent and have that fight happen, or her go free agent. We just mentioned how she signed a huge contract with Bellator, and then going back to the UFC. I think, we can say goodbye to that fight. I mean, you never know. Chuck Liddell fought Tito Ortiz a third time, and we thought that would never happen, right, at some point. But it did. Hopefully we don't get to that with these two ladies. But, I just don't see that fight happening. So that sucks. But all in all, I think this is a good move by Bellator, by Cyborg, by the UFC, for the fans. This is all good news. So those are kind of like the pros and cons that I find of this deal. And lastly, I kind of just wanted to touch on Cris Cyborg's legacy, and I know I'm going a little long here, but it is a very, very, very complicated one. Legacy in the UFC, I mean, for the longest time, it was get Cyborg to the UFC, right? Everybody was tweeting. There was kind of like a social campaign by the public, like, get Cyborg in the UFC, right? Because everybody knew that Cyborg was so talented, and we knew that when you are so talented, in fact, you are the best at what you do, you should be in the UFC. You want to contest against the best. Not only that, but that's where you should belong, right? In the highest platform, in the highest exposure of MMA, right? The highest level. And most people wanted to see that. A lot of people wanted to see that. Cyborg wanted to see that. The UFC wanted to see that because they obliged and they signed Cris Cyborg. But it didn't turn out to be what people thought it was going to be. People thought maybe there was going to be a division created, maybe a Ronda Rousey fight. We knew that went out the window. And, things of that nature. We thought there was going to be fun times. And don't get me wrong, there were some really, really good fights and some fun times. But, a lot of it was plagued by the ugly dynamic they had there, right? Cris Cyborg didn't feel promoted like, they promote other greats, right? Other champions, say like a Conor McGregor or other champions, or even Ronda Rousey, right? Or even fighters that have not held belts like, Paige Van Zandt, Sage Northcutt, right? She didn't feel like the machine was behind her. And that was a bit unfortunate. So, it's a weird one. Her career in the UFC is a very, very strange one, but nonetheless, despite all the negativity, I think it was the right move, and I think maybe Cyborg, not now, but like give her some time to kind of get farther away from the situation. I mean, I haven't spoken to her, but all in all, I feel like she would probably think it's a very positive thing, a very positive time in her life, in the sense of, I think she would have been looked differently if, say, she would have just gone to Bellator or elsewhere and then just continued fighting. I think there was definitely some sort of validation to her career of being a UFC champion, not only being in the UFC, but being a UFC champion. And I think that goes for a lot of fighters. I mean, if she goes on to win the Bellator title, which obviously she would have to fight Julia Budd, which, again, another pro, that's an amazing fight, a pretty good fight. Like, some of the biggest complaints about Cyborg's run in the UFC were, she's just fighting a bunch of 35ers. Like, we want to see her against real 45ers, and eventually the UFC had to do that and bring some talent over. But she'll be fighting a real 45er here, and a very, very good one, and a very, very dangerous one. So that should be fun. But anyways, I'm going here on a little detour. But Yeah, she definitely got some validation by the UFC belt, and if she does happen to win a belt at Bellator, she can say she'd be a Strikeforce, a former Strikeforce champion, former Invicta champion, former UFC champion, and Bellator champion. That's pretty big. And talking about the GOAT conversation between Nunez and Cyborg, that would only, help Cyborg and make things more interesting as far as, who'd be the GOAT, which, it's always a fun conversation among fans and media. So, all in all, I'm glad Cyborg got, her chance to fight in the UFC. I'm glad she got the chance to get UFC gold, be on pay-per-view, and get that exposure. I think it's important for any fighter's career, right? It's not everything, but it is important. So, yeah, those are my overall thoughts on this signing. I thought it was a very, very good one. Please comment below and let me know what you think of this signing. Do you like it? Do you not? Would you have preferred her to go elsewhere? Maybe make things okay with the UFC and go back? Let me know what you think. Also, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends about it. And that's all I got. Peace.